of girls is to teach them that your life is really about finding a husband. Marriage is something you aspire to. And so, I have many friends in Nigeria who are deeply unhappy, either because they're married people they did not really want to marry, but it was time to settle down, or because they're stuck in marriages in which they're unhappy, but because the whole idea of marriage is that you stay married. And I think that very often what we do is that we conflate marriage and fulfillment, and they're just not synonyms. They're not. There are women who actually may not want to get married, and I think that we need to make space in our society for them. But most of all, we need to teach our girls to go and conquer the world.
And seeing that Chimamanda is already conquering the world, and overturning my chair's instructions on how to say the answer, and the gentleman.
Thank you. Chimamanda, obviously, you are writing in a foreign language, and it comes with a lot of baggage, which I won't go into. In colonialism and all that. There's also a different culture. So could you just give us some thoughts on writing in a foreign language, in a culture which is quite different from yours?
I'm really sorry, I don't even agree with the premise, which is that English English is mine. It's mine. And I think one of the things I find interesting, it has become mine. One of the things that I sometimes find quite frustrating is the idea that somebody comes, imposes themselves on your land, sort of changes things around, makes you, in many ways makes you, because if the system of education is entirely in English, you don't have a choice. And then turns around and says to you, it's actually not your language. Well, I'm sorry, it's mine. It is mine. I grew up speaking both, and I say this as recognizing, of course, that I'm coming from a place of a certain kind of privilege, a middle classness. There are people in Nigeria for whom English is not what it is to me. I grew up speaking both English and Igbo. I speak both very well. I, however, cannot write Igbo as well as I write English. I went to school in Nigeria. The language of education was English. Not only was it English, but you could be punished for speaking what they call the vernacular. So there were people that I remember this girl in my class who was a serious busybody, and she would say, I'm going to report you for speaking the vernacular. And you realize how absurd, in retrospect, of course, you realize how absurd it is that you're going to be punished for speaking the language of your grandfather. It's just the absurdity of it. But this is happening in Nigeria. It's happening in Nsukka, in a small town in eastern Nigeria. It happened all over Nigeria, and it happened all over Africa. And which meant, of course, that I and many others like me grew up having English as the only language, really, with which we could make a philosophical argument, write poetry. Many Igbo people of my generation cannot read a word of Igbo, cannot write it atrociously. In some ways, I'm different because I made the choice to learn to write Igbo, and I write it fairly well. But I really couldn't write, I can't write poetry in Igbo because there's certain things I just don't have because I haven't been given those things. And so for me, I think to talk about the language in which African literature is written today is a subject that we really shouldn't do until we talk about the way that we educate people in our countries. You can't, somebody has said to me, oh, aren't you going to publish your book in Igbo? And I said to her, well, who's going to read it? Because Igbo people can't read it. Because English, in many ways, is the only language they can read. And, translating my book is something I plan to do. Actually, I want to do it myself, and it might be terrible. But only as a labor of love. Because, if we're practical, it just doesn't make sense. So in some ways, I think that what we should really be talking about is changing the way we educate people. Not that we have to change the language of education itself, but that we should find ways to give value to our own languages. You have young people all over Africa who proudly say, I don't speak Igbo. Or they'll say, no, we don't speak our language, our local language. And it's just really silly because of the world stuff.
I just wanted to ask you, as a writer, how do you feel about your book being made into a I'm talking about half of a yellow song.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pleased about it. No, but I should say there's a part of me that's a little ungracious because I hear that people were so excited about the film, and I just thought, well, it would be nice if you were as excited about the book. So I find that I'm quite ungracious on this subject. But I also realize that Half of a Yellow Sun is a book that matters so much to me in a deeply personal way, and if the film means that more people get to hear the story, then I think for me that's a good thing. But I'm also very clear about how the film is such a different thing from a book. Just by their very nature, films are just not like books. And the filmmaker B is somebody I deeply respect and admire. And I hope that it's going to be a good film, but I have had nothing to do with it because I didn't want to have a heart attack.
Okay, can we have another show of hands? I've already picked up 2 people, so if we can have the woman at the back there, and then at the back there, and the gentleman on that row, and then we'll yes, sir. So, please.
Chimamanda, thank you so very much. It's an absolute pleasure to finally be meeting with you and listening to you speak. You speak so eloquently, and what Ike said in his introduction, you really do voice the stories and the questions that I know that I definitely want to be told. And in relating to the question that was asked about the film, I am one of the people that was extremely excited simply because your Half of a Yellow Sun changed my life. Literally because I'm Nigerian by descent, but I grew up in England. And honestly, I finished reading the book, and the first thing I did was went to my mom and said, "What were you doing in the 60s?" Because I'm Yoruba. So for me, my mom talked about that era, and I never heard about Biafra before. The first time I heard about Biafra was when I went to a Young Igbo Society event, and I kept saying, "What is this Biafra?" So reading Half of a Yellow Sun was like reading an historic event for the first time. Okay, I'm doing one of those things. Sorry. Okay, the question I wanted to ask was, how did you feel when there was that nonsense about the main characters had to be Nigerian? I mean, seriously, why?
I was kind of look, I've been working on a new novel for so long, and I just was focused on writing that novel, right? And then when one of my friends, my busybody friend, also, I was in you. It's very sweet. I think protects me from. Because I don't like to read things about myself. So it's very sweet how he'll know, but he'll protect me. So Uzo sent me this email saying, "Have you heard there's something going on the internet?" So of course I then call him, like, "What's going on?" He said, "Don't worry, just write your book, don't mind it." But of course I couldn't not worry. So of course I then go online to see what's happening. I thought it was on the one hand I thought it was silly. But then on the other, I do understand where that comes from. I understand where that, where people for whom our stories have been told for so long by others. And I understand that sort of emotional desire that, it's our book. And also I was very flattered and pleased that Nigerians had taken such ownership of this novel that, they were making demands about who should play it. And a part of me, I wanted to ask them, well, do you know the fundraising for the film? Do you know how the film came to be? No, but really, and then I thought that there is something very troubling about saying that a character who is Igbo in a book has to be played by an actor who is Igbo, because then we can really get into very worrying territory. And if we flip that around, many actors of color would not have jobs, because then somebody will say, well, we can't give you that job because, hey, it was actually written for you. So I think it just really gets complicated. So obviously I did not agree with but at the same time, in some ways, I felt sympathy for it, and particularly I think for the idea that so many black women who are placed in our pop culture as icons of talent and beauty are light-skinned, and a lot of women clearly were very angry about that. But also, I remember thinking, I kind of imagined Olana to be light-skinned, so let's just calm down.
Hi, thank you for your excellent speech and your novels as well. I also identify as a black feminist, so good to us. I just wanted to touch upon you made a comment about someone in America talking about Indian-born African, an African-born Indian person. And their book, and how that was supposed to be representative of Africa at large. And I wanted to talk about the kind of, tension between post-colonial literature being popular at the moment in the West, and also being seen as representative of all Africans, and what, how you deal and navigate that burden.
I don't even recognize what the burden is.
I guess the burden is that all literature that you create somehow speaks about everyone who is African. That it's representative always. It can't just be a work of literature that stands on its own in a way that if a white author wrote that, nobody would be saying.
Okay, sorry, we do need to move on. So, thank you.
Although it's so hard for me to take this seriously. So, my feeling, at first, it's really not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I want to write, I want to tell stories, and it's a process that isn't always as easy as I would want it to be. So really, I'm sitting down in front of my computer, and what I'm hoping is that I write sentences that I like. And so I'm actually not spending a lot of time thinking, what people are going to think. I really don't. However, there are times when somebody will respond to my book and make these sorts of sweeping generalizations about, this is what Africans do. And of course it's irritating because I obviously don't speak for all Nigerians. I don't speak for all Igbo people. I don't even speak for all people from my local government area. but at the same time, there's a history, there's a reason that happens, and it's because, what's that expression, critical mass. We haven't gotten there yet. We are going to get there, where there's so many African stories being told that we will no longer be seen, and by we, I mean each individual writer will no longer be seen as somebody speaking for everyone. The reason it's happening now is because we just don't have many stories. But it is changing. And we are going to get there, and I think it'll stop. So in some ways it's annoying, it's irritating, but there's a reason that it happens, and which is why I'm very invested, for example, in changing that. I think that the more African stories we have, the better for all of us, not just for the people who can't read well.
Thank you very much. Where the microphones are, sorry.
It's really nice to finally see you. I read your book when I was actually quite young, but there's always something that's stuck in my mind that I've always wanted to ask. It was about Half of the Yellow Sun. The character Richard that you have in there, I've always wondered why you had a white British man going through the journey with the other characters. And he was actually my favourite character when I was reading the book. And yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Thank you. I'm really happy to hear that he was your favourite character. But be careful, because some self-styled preservers of African culture might come after you after this game. Tell you how you're un-African. But Richard became, really, the entirely honest answer to that question is that the character of Richard was inspired when I read Frederick Forsyth. And Frederick Forsyth went through Biafra with Biafrans, as did many other white Europeans. And I also felt that the story of Biafra is impossible to tell without telling. You can't pretend that, in many ways, that Biafra was possible, the Biafran War was possible because of the participation of Europeans. If, for example, the British and the Russians and the French had just sort of stepped aside, the war would not have happened, because first of all, people wouldn't have guns to kill each other. And the war would not have happened in the way that it did. Biafra would not have become the biggest human catastrophe in the world since the Second World War. And the reason that it became that as well, and the reason it became this thing in the whole world where people were told all over the world, eat up your food, Biafran children are dying. And that was because Western journalists covered Biafra. That's because, Biafran kids on the cover of Life. That's because, all of that. So for me, it was important to acknowledge and recognize that the story of the Biafran War is impossible to tell without acknowledging and including the non-Nigerian voice. But I wanted to change things around a little. I wanted him to not just be sort of the terrible British is giving Nigerians guns, but really to be more like a Frederick Forsyth, sort of, becoming more Biafran than Biafrans themselves, which is equal parts lovely and annoying. So that was really good. Can I just say, I wanted to say something about, because I just remembered that your question about, yes, about the burden. But actually, before that, what I said, I just wanted to clarify that what I said about the book, the unnamed novel, which this American woman said, she said it had explained modern Africa to her. And in some ways, my objection wasn't because it was about an Indian man born in Kenya. I mean, I feel very strongly that Indian people born in Africa are Africans, if they choose to be, right? And there's actually a fantastic Indian-Kenyan writer whose name I'm so annoyed I've forgotten. But he wrote The In-Between World of Vikram Lal. Yes, M.G. Pasanji, who is just incredible. But anyway, so it's not, I don't know if that's what you implied by your question, but that was not at all. The basis for my objection was that book that she was talking about is not even about the sorts of thing that M.G. Pasanji would write about. That book is really, not only is it about a certain contempt for Africans, but it's also really about a longing for Europe. So I didn't see how it somehow explained modern Africa to her.
Thank you. Where's the second microphone? One over there. So if we do that and that, and I'm afraid those are the last questions. So please.
Okay, thank you.
Please, quick, because we're overrunning already.
Thank you so much for being a wonderful African ambassador. Second, how would you really get the girls in the village who have talents to rise up so that they will not sit with their talents? And many of them are across the continent, but they long to find someone to help. What are you doing about it?
For the Nigerians here, my first thought was Simi Citro. But I think, I wish do you know what I want to do? I want to wave this magic wand and have everything change, but I can't.
But I'm from Kenya, that's why.
I think that many people are, but you're right about that, but I think that there are people doing wonderful work. There are lots of women, there are lots of NGOs in Nigeria, for example, that are involved in all kinds of things. We just don't often get to hear about them. And if anything, what am I doing? I wish I could do more. But let me tell you a story about a woman who came to my workshop from a small village around near Benin some years ago. I run this writing workshop in Lagos every year, and she applied. And you have to apply online, and apparently she traveled miles to get to where she could use an internet cafe, and she wrote this in her application, how far she traveled, blah, blah, blah. And the writing was fine, but that story itself was very moving for me. And because I'm a believer in affirmative action, which is that people who are underrepresented should be represented, so I selected her for the workshop. And she came to the workshop, and at the beginning of the workshop, she was just very shaky, not very confident. And by the end of 2 weeks, she'd become a really good writer. So she goes back to her village near Benin, and I think she's going to be a different person in many ways. It's a very small change, but I think it's something.
And the last question for the evening.
Hello. Hi, firstly, I think you look absolutely amazing.
Sorry.
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you look absolutely gorgeous. Thank you so much for coming to London. Firstly, thank you for saying the whole thing about little girls shouldn't be aspiring to marriage. I totally agree 100%. And also the fact that there are so many stories that need to come out of Africa and that need to be told. And you also mentioned about having this sort of new wave or new generation of female African writers. I just wanted to know, what you think about basically how long will it be until we hear lesbian and gay African voices within either from African authors or in actual storylines as a sort of narrative, as a normative thing rather than as a sort of study, just having like a lesbian and gay storyline.
Thank you very much.
Not necessarily from you, just from...
I think it's already happening. I think that there is writing. Yes, Monica around me. Yes. What was that about?
In the African love stories that Nana mentioned earlier.
Sorry, I came in really late.
Sorry?
I came in quite late.
The story that won the Cape Prize in 2006 was actually about love between two girls. You got that.
And there's a story on the Cape Prize shortlist this year that is about a gay character. And I just remembered my story. May I shamelessly recommend that you read a story called The Shivering, which you may find in a story collection called The Thing Around Your Neck. But really, can I just tell a really quick story about that story? So somebody in Nigeria once told me that they had read The Thing Around Your Neck for a book club, and they had read this story. And then he said to me, and in this story, the woman, the main character, meets and becomes friends with this Nigerian in the US who turns out to be gay. But we don't know that he's gay until much later in the story. So we just see him, and then until he tells her that he's gay. And this man who was telling me about the book club said, that story, The Shivering, the problem with it is by the time we realized he was gay, we already liked him. The problem that you caused, right? So you made us like a gay person last year. And for me, it was so, and I was very pleased to hear that. And I said, that's the point. I mean, I think one of the things that literature should do is to humanize people. You know, this idea somehow that because a person happens to love a person of the same sex, then somehow they're evil and bad, it's just to me fundamentally ridiculous. But at the same time, I understand that a lot of these objections that we have in Africa are based on what I consider incomplete understandings of certain religions. And I hope the religious police will not send me emails. But no, I think it's happening, and I think it will continue to happen, because what's happened now is that we're finally acknowledging that being gay is not something white people brought to us. You know, there have been gay Africans for centuries, and finally I think that people are, that we're in some ways I think that what's happening with my generation of male and female writers is a certain confidence in telling things as they are, not as we think they should be.
Thank you very much, Chimamanda. Thank you to the Royal African Society. Richard Dowden, Director of the Royal African Society, who has put all this together.
Thank you so much. I was in such a hurry when I came in, and I was so frazzled by them, I forgot to introduce myself. Richard Dowden, I'm Director of the Royal African Society, and tonight has been, I think, the best event we've ever put on. People have already said it's life-changing. I mean, you can't get better than that. It's been absolutely wonderful. And also just very, very funny, too. I must say, it was just beautiful. When I was trying to find a chair for this evening, and I consulted widely who should do this, and I said it's got to be somebody from Africa. And eventually the consensus built around Ayebia. And I had no idea they had grown up together. Extraordinary. Well, it's a coincidence. I had no idea at all. So that was a sort of wonderful thing, but I've also had a terrible illusion shattered tonight. Because you called the white journalist Richard, and he came from Shropshire, and he covered wars, I assumed it was me. Tomorrow we start at 12 with children's storytelling and a session on writing away from home and Jack McBangy's book launch. And we have 13 speakers tomorrow, of whom 11 are women. So I think we'd already got the message, I think. And I don't think that was, in any way, that was deliberate. It was just these were the best people. So tomorrow we start at 12, and we finish with the word from Africa at the South Bank. So the last meeting of Africa Writes moves to the South Bank for the first meeting of Africa, of Word from Africa and Africa Utopia. I do want to say thank you to the RAS staff who've done a fantastic job in particular, Sheila Ruiz. And yes, keep in touch with RAS, and particularly with our Africa UK project, which we work with AFORD on the diaspora, engaging the diaspora much more in Britain, getting its voice heard. But we have lots of other events and meetings coming up, so do follow us. And tonight, I think book signing? Yeah, okay. You're all invited upstairs for a drink, and Chimamanda's going to sign some books. But finally, Chimamanda, again, thank you very much.